Gonna have to return. Gonna have to return to the old Joker movie. We're not done with it yet because there's so much analysis you can do in the span of weeks and days. But what I hadn't seen was the formalist analysis, which is you're taking a look not at, I mean, everyone sort of looks at the movie and they say, well, this is going to inspire people. How can people sympathize with Arthur Fleck? Everyone takes it from the perspective of, how's this going to affect poor right-wing people? How's this going to affect poor left-wing people? How do they interpret this? How do they identify with it, etc., etc.? What did the elites intend to propagandize with this movie? What was their intention? What was their intended message at the masses? This is kind of the way that the movie's interpreted. But I think there's another interpretation, which we don't usually do, but it's the interpretation of, what if you're an elite watching this movie? And that's a weird question, right? But what is the message, if you're an elite, what is the message you take away from this movie? There's a couple of things. First of all, Thomas Wayne, you don't become a politician yourself, you hire someone to be a politician on your behalf. You go to Murray Franklin and you're like, listen, Murray, we're good friends, aren't we? Oh, of course, Mr. Wayne, you're a great guy, you've done so much for the city. Thank you, Murray, thank you. I've been thinking the city's in a real tough spot recently with all these politicians and everything, all politics these days. It's crazy. Someone really needs to sort that out. And Murray says, it's true, Mr. Wayne. Would you ever consider running? And Wayne says, no, Murray, I'm too busy. I'm a busy man. But I think what the people need is they need someone who can inspire confidence. All these rules and laws and bureaucratic stuff, that doesn't matter, Murray. What matters is people feel like they're cared for, that people feel like there's someone in charge who cares about them. Wouldn't you agree, Murray? Of course, Mr. Wayne. I think that's huge. So Mr. Wayne says, Murray, and I've been doing some thinking, and, I think you would be the perfect guy for the job. And Murray says, but Mr. Wayne, I'm not a politician. I could never do that. And Mr. Wayne says, Murray, I'm going to leave something behind for you, and I just want you to think about it. And so he leaves behind, an envelope or a briefcase or something, and he walks out. And Murray opens it. It's full of $60,000 or something, and he calls Mr. Wayne up the next day or something and says, Mr. Wayne, I've been thinking about that conversation we had. And he says, great, I'm going to send over my consultant, 2 o'clock. See you then. Bye. And that's how it goes. And then Murray Franklin is the new president of Ukraine. And that's how it works. And that's the smart way to do it, right? That is the smart way. If you are really Thomas Wayne, if you're really a rich guy, don't become a politician yourself. You hire someone to do the dirty work for you. Then when the politician gets assassinated, you just go hire some other politician to do the dirty work for you. So that's that aspect of it. And then you can get even more down in the weeds with the 3 banksters on the subway who get killed, because they're messing with the lower classes. They are directly fraternizing and messing with the lower classes. At first you've got this woman, and they're sort of harassing this woman, and then they harass this, what appears to be like a homeless guy or a low-class guy on the subway. And this situation should never happen. First of all, if you've got some drunk frat boys, they should be taking an Uber or a taxi or some form of limo or private transportation, never on the public subway. And they should not be harassing some random woman. They should be hiring a paid prostitute who they can just, do the old the Kennedy trick, which is, when if the prostitute's giving you a little trouble, you use the old Kennedy maneuver on her. So you have those aspects, and then the idea that you'd ever be directly harassing. No, you always have to have a middleman, right? So you never directly harass the population. Instead, you use mass immigration to harass the population, or you use media to harass the population. You have some kind of middleman. The sadism doesn't stop, but you don't do it directly. And if you do it directly, again, you got to be like the Saudis, like the Saudi princes. You got to hire some Instagram model to go to Dubai to do some modeling for you. That's the way you do it. So you do it through these kind of controlled channels. So the subway is this open, chaotic space, and in that movie it's shown to be this open, chaotic space. It's sort of the forum where everyone goes, and that leaves you vulnerable as a rich person. So you don't want to be in that space. You won't always want to be above that space, outside of that space. You know, there is that. Let me see if I search New York socialite. If I search New York, oops, there's a sound. New York socialite car crash. Is it going to pop up? Are we going to get it? Lizzie Grubman. You know, how much time did Lizzie Grubman do? She served 38 days in jail for crashing into a crowd of, and she injured 16 people. Imagine that. Imagine how big the crowd must have been. That she just drives into a crowd. This is 2002. She drives into a crowd, and, you know, she's just hitting people. Normally you see a car coming, and someone gets hit and you jump out of the way. But if it's a dense enough crowd, then your reaction time is slow enough you can't jump out of the way. And so she's just piling through people, and she manages to hit 16 different people. I mean, can you believe that? Is that not incredible? You know, and she gets 38 days, I guess. So there is this level of law. There are these different aspects and levels of law. You know, and we sort of saw the Epstein drama. What was interesting about the Epstein drama is that Epstein seemed to be in one sort of a legal category and then jumped into a different legal category. And at first, I would say there are three, generally speaking, there are three legal categories. There is maybe the average legal category. This is explicit law. This is the way the law is supposed to work. This is law on the surface. This is like a popular interpretation of law is like you are innocent until proven guilty. There are certain laws, you know, if you break the law, you go to jail. And it's sort of this explicit middle region of law. And then you have like maybe the subterranean and then the higher heavenly law, we might say, is a way to put it. And the subterranean law is like you've done nothing wrong. So there was a case recently. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. I believe it was on a college campus that you had two white students who were yelling expletives. They were yelling expletives. And so you could say that, well, maybe that's against college rules. Maybe they're going to get expelled. You know, college rules used to be pretty extreme. Back in the day, in like the 1950s, if you were caught having premarital relations, even sleeping in the same room, boy and girl, you could be expelled from college for that. So it was pretty extreme. I think this happened in Connecticut. So it was at University of Connecticut, and 3 people, Washington Post, 3 people walking. At the University of Connecticut, it looks like they were in an apartment complex. They were shouting an expletive. You know, ever heard of the penis game? It's like you start saying the word, and then you get louder and louder until you're screaming. It's very funny. But they were doing it with a bad word. And there's an 11-second video. They're being charged with violating a hate crime statute, which says that it is illegal to ridicule on account of creed, religion, color, denomination, nationality, or race, a misdemeanor punishable by a maximum of 30 days in jail, a fine of $50, or both according to state law, which is pretty incredible. Again, people think we have freedom of speech. We don't have freedom of speech. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen when we lose our freedom? What's going to happen when we lose our freedom of speech? We don't have freedom of speech. Freedom of speech doesn't exist. Again, you have these 3 levels of law that people think there's only one type of law. There's really 3 levels, and it's a spectrum, but if we're going to simplify the model, we're going to say there's 3 levels. We're going to say there's a middle level, which is what people think is law. Like, we have the right to freedom of speech. We have the right to bear arms. These things don't exist. You do not have the right to freedom of speech. You do not have the right to bear arms. You have the illusion of freedom of speech, and you have the illusion of the right to bear arms. Those are illusions that are granted in order to maintain some kind of stability of the system. Because if the politicians like in a Thomas Wayne style come out and say, you don't have freedom of speech, you don't have the right to bear arms, that's a joke, that's just a piece of paper, we can do whatever we want to you maggots. If politicians say that, that's going to fuel disturbances and unrest and riots and protests and things of that nature. So they say, no, absolutely, we believe in freedom of speech, we believe in the right to bear arms, but we also need regulations about that, that we need a compromise, or we need to change the semantics of it or whatever. We believe in free speech but not hate speech. So these are all games that are played. And so if you are a normie, I guess, is the middle region, you think you have freedom of speech, and then you start yelling something offensive, and all of a sudden that's a crime. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense if you're operating in this middle region, or you're thinking in this middle region. But actually, there's a subterranean region, which is if we don't like you, if the system doesn't like you for whatever reason, they can always make an exception to the rule. They can always come up with something. And then there is a heavenly region where if you're Lizzie Grubman and you crash into a crowd and you injure 16 people with your car intentionally, you do that out of malice. I mean, why would she do something like that? Why would she do something like that? Well, she was drunk. She was drunk driving, first of all. But then she also screamed out her window, "Fuck you, white trash." So maybe she was maybe she was trying to get through a passageway, and there were a bunch of white trash in front of her vehicle, maliciously stopping her. And maybe Antifa was holding a protest, and she yelled, "Fuck you, white trash," and she crashed into them purposefully. She did a James Fields on them. And she got 38 days in jail, and, she's doing pretty well. She's doing pretty well for herself now. And it's a pretty good... Now, the middle law, again, she faced up to 8 years in prison. But that doesn't matter. She faced up to 8 years, but she only got 38 days. She left the scene of the car accident. She left the scene. I don't know. To me, it sounds like attempted murder. To me, it sounds like she intended to kill people while drunk driving, and it was racially motivated. It was a hate crime. But she got 38 days. So you see there are these 3 levels. There is the statute, which says, oh, technically she could face up to 8 years. Then there is the heavenly law, which says she only gets 38 days. Then there is the hellish law, or the draconian law, or the subterranean law, which says you're going to get 8 life sentences for crashing into a crowd of screaming Antifa protesters. So we see that there is no equality before the law. That is a false concept. That is a fake concept that doesn't exist. Really, you have 3 levels of law, and there's a spectrum in between. And what was interesting about Epstein is at one point he was in that heavenly category, and when he did bad stuff, he got off easy. And in fact, he got to continue to do his bad stuff. He was in house arrest after being uncovered as this huge, player in this underage prostitution ring. He got uncovered, and then he was in house arrest, and then he was allowed to leave I think he was in prison during the day, and then he could leave at night. Or, it wasn't like he was locked in a jail cell, and he could go out and fraternize with prostitutes or do whatever he wanted to do. Possibly even more underage women, we don't know, continue his activities. So it's like he got caught, but he was in this heavenly stratosphere of society where he could avoid punishment for wrongdoing. Whereas if you're in the middle, you think, no, of course he should be put in jail. And if Epstein was not in the right category, if he was in the wrong category, and let's say Epstein was not, for example, he was not a huge, basically a mob boss type, criminal mastermind, and people say he was handled by Giselle or whoever. Oh, right, 3 levels of law. So Epstein was in a heavenly category. But then at some point, for some reason, he dropped not into a normal category, because in a normal category, there's a thing called double jeopardy, where you cannot be charged twice for the same crime. This is to prevent harassment from the state, because if double jeopardy was not a thing, then the state could charge you for murder, you get proven innocent, and then they prove you, or proven not guilty beyond a reason, whatever the official designation is. Basically, you get proven innocent, and then they charge you again. You get proven innocent, and they charge you again. And this is a way that the government could theoretically harass you and infringe on your rights. But no one cares about that. No one cares. Epstein was protected under the double jeopardy clause, and yet he was charged again for the same exact crimes. So he did not go through the normie category. He went straight from heavenly down to subterranean instantaneously. So one has to wonder, what did he do to go from being favored in the eyes of the law to being actually persecuted? One has to question. And again, maybe we can say it was a righteous persecution, but probably not, because it seems that Giselle or whoever his handler was got away scot-free. So I don't think any justice was technically done. I don't think it actually solved any of the problems. I think he just did something wrong. I don't know what he did wrong. We may never know, just like we don't know what happened with the Las Vegas shooter. But whatever happened, we know that there are these levels of law. And so the point of the matter is that if you are within the system, if you're part of the elite, if you're rich, if you're a socialite, whatever, you're above the law. If you are a Kennedy and you're killing prostitutes or just killing women in general, you're fine. You don't spend a day in jail. If you're a Kennedy and you upset LBJ, or LBJ doesn't like you, or he wants power for himself, then you die, right? So it's a hairy situation. Once you're in the elite, you either follow all the rules and all the laws and you go along to get along, but if you make one false step, you're dead. It's like the mob. It's like the mafia. That's who we're ruled by. Mobsters, essentially. So when the going is good, the going is really good. But again, if you make a false step, then you're down to the subterranean. Then you're a terrorist, right? This happened, theoretically, it happened with Osama bin Laden. If he's even like a real person, people were speculating, is that really even him? Is that a body double? People were making all kinds of speculations. But at one point, the United States government was funding him. And then he did some things they didn't like. And then he became enemy number one. And then they killed him, theoretically, if the mainstream narrative is true. So it's a fine line. Most people have this conception of like, we hover toward the middle. There's like a bell curve of law. We try to stay in the middle and equality before the law. But essentially, if you are above the law doesn't apply and you don't have to worry about it. And there are many cases, if you can afford a good enough lawyer, then, O.J. Simpson, he's good. He's good, Who else? What other egregious examples of breaking or violating the law can we look at and say, oh, he's good? But Nixon makes one false step, and he does what every politician is doing dirty stuff. We know that Trump was wiretapped in a number of ways. We know they were spying on Trump in the Trump campaign. We know that there continue to be secret agents within the Trump administration who are doing leaks and things of this nature. So we understand that this is just business as usual. This is just politics as usual. We know about the muckrakers. We know about yellow journalism. We know about Tammany Hall, or however you say it. So we know politics has been really dirty for a long time, and we know that Nixon didn't do anything out of the ordinary. But at some point, they were able to say, oh, but if you apply normal law to Richard Nixon, he's a criminal, he's a crook. Well, it's like every single politician engages in that kind of what we call opposition research. Every politician engages in that. So to single him out was clearly an example of, lawfare, weaponizing law, legal weaponization. And so it's less about what does the statute say, what does the law say, what is justice in like a Platonic sense. What is the good, what is just, what is good for society. And it is more about, are you in the tribe, are you in the club, are you rich, are you living the life, or are you a normal person, at which point you get fed into the bureaucracy and you have to deal with that. Or are you a target? Are you a terrorist? Are you a criminal? Are you not just a criminal, but are you some way threatening to the system? If you get into that Epstein territory, if you get into that, JFK territory, if you get into a certain territory, then it doesn't matter what the law is. Either way, it doesn't matter if you are Grubman, if you are Lizzie Grubman, then the law doesn't matter because you're going to get off anyway. But if you are these two University of Connecticut students, then it doesn't really matter that we have a First Amendment. It doesn't really matter that we theoretically, people say we have freedom of speech. You don't. You don't have freedom of speech. Your life is over. You will never have a good job because a simple Google search will say you are unemployable. You might have jail time. You might have a misdemeanor on your record. You're going to be ritually humiliated. People will dox you. People will follow you. You're now on a list, essentially. The FBI has done this brilliant thing where they've outsourced a lot of their harassment to Antifa, where previously you had people like J. Edgar Hoover who would be spying on MLK and spying on people and threatening them and threatening to dox them in certain senses, to dox their private lives of what was going on in MLK's private life. Well, the orientation of the FBI and CIA has shifted politically since then. A lot of things have shifted to a degree. And I think J. Edgar Hoover, in a way, I look at that whole time period, I look at what's going on. It's just a weird time. It's a zany time. There's a lot of weird things where you have people who are anti-communists who are at the same time like Roy Cohn. It's like he's an anti-communist, but he's also a homosexual. So the term anti-communist, you think it's like a conservative or a traditionalist. But these people oftentimes who were the biggest, strongest advocates of anti-communism were some of the weirdest people. So it's a very interesting thing, the whole concept of anti-communism, when you realize that at some point, the understanding of, and again, Stalin, he died suddenly. We don't know exactly how he died. But when you get to the point of Stalinism, you realize, ooh, the Soviet experiment has sort of gone sour, because if one man can take over the whole Soviet apparatus, then the capricious nature of that one man can guide Soviet communism into a reactionary direction, and that's dangerous. Much better to have a neoliberal capitalist corporatist world where Bill Gates can't just go off the reservation, or Epstein can't just go off the reservation. If a billionaire decides, I don't like this system, I'm going to be a charismatic national populist leader, I'm going to ally with the working class in order to bring down the system or threaten the system in any way, that person can be thrown out. That person can be targeted in many ways. And so someone like Epstein, can be thrown out if they need to throw him out for whatever reason. I don't know why, but you can throw someone out if you need to. So that is it's a much safer system where there's no one leader, but it's a network of people who have agreed upon ideologies, and the market is king, and no one person has all the power. There's a danger in Stalinism and Soviet communism that if one naughty communist boy gets in charge and he says, you know what, I actually don't like the gays, well, then that kind of puts a fly in the ointment, and kind of there's a potential, whenever you have an authoritarian power structure, there is a potential for a right-wing or reactionary or just something disruptive to come out of that. So much better to have a classical liberal system. And, so it's no wonder that a lot of at some point you get this neoconservative phenomenon where some wacky people, some J. Edgar Hoover types, are very strong anti-communists because they hate the instability of communism. Doesn't mean they're moral people, doesn't mean they are good people or anything like that, but they start to see communism as a threat to their ideology, to their certain esoteric circles and their certain way of doing things. So that is a struggle that goes on for a while, the anti-communist movement. But you've seen the FBI outsource a lot of its manpower to volunteer forces like Antifa, who they don't need to be paid to do it. They'll just sort of automatically, of their own free will, of their own time, because they're brainwashed, they will hunt people down, they will harass them, they will threaten them, they will assault them, they will do this all extrajudicially. So again, there's always this excuse of, oh, it's not us, it is just these wild Antifa. It's very interesting to see Kyle Kulinski, who is, I guess, a socialist. I guess he's a left-wing person, but he very succinctly describes the evolution of imperialism from the British model of we invade you, we extract the resources, which again, from a I don't know what he's calling himself these days, the People's Veto, Fringe Elements, Reinfeld, has done analysis where a lot of the imperialism and colonization, more resources were sometimes poured into a country than were taken out in the form of raw materials. So, there's a lot of skepticism I have about that narrative, but let's go with it for a moment. You go in and you extract the resources. I think, sometimes you have to look at which classes are benefiting. You have a military-industrial complex, which clearly benefits, and then maybe you have a priest class, which is making sacrifices, or doctors and teachers go over there making sacrifices. So there are different, I guess, levels of wealth redistribution involved in colonialism. Clearly, some people do benefit. But the quote-unquote nation as a whole may not benefit in some senses. Or the working class certainly will not benefit from the outsourcing of labor. So you do have that kind of explicit imperialism, which then moves to an American model where it's like, oh, America's not going to go in and invade, but we're going to bribe a man who lives in that country to become an authoritarian fascist dictator, as you see in South America, and he's going to do the bidding of America, and America can say, oh, well, our hands are clean. We didn't invade that country. That country has its own problems. That's not our concern. When in all actuality, we know America's controlling it. And then Kyle is saying, well, this evolves from America to China, where China's going in and doing this. I don't think it's all that much different, but they're offering all this foreign aid, Silk Road, Belt Road, whatever it's called. We're going to develop your country, and we're going to put you into debt, and then you're going to essentially have to do what we say. So China's doing this in Africa. It's now doing this in places like Iraq. China's doing this all over the place, where there will never be, I never say never, but there's not like a huge mass of Chinese overseas foreign military presence in Iraq or in Africa. Maybe there are some security teams or security forces defending some certain Chinese businessmen, but it's not to the extent that America has it, where we have all these overseas bases, we have all these overseas troops, we have all these foreign wars going on. China sees that model as extremely costly, frankly. And China's not interested in doing that. China's like, look, we'll give you money, and then you got to do what we say. And then a lot of these people are like, okay, all right, well, what do you want us to do? All right, well, we want you to buy Chinese stuff or something like that. They're not saying, well, we want you to become a democracy. They're not saying we want you to secularize necessarily. We're not saying you need to change your culture. We're not saying you need to become a feminist. We're not saying any of that. We're just saying we're going to invest in you, and we expect a return on our investment, not ideologically necessarily, but materially, geopolitically. We want allies. We want resources. We want these sort of things. So you've seen China's done this in Afghanistan. China has done this in Iraq. Okay, so Kyle is analyzing that, and at the end of it he says, but that's all bad. That's all bad stuff. Of course, we hate all that stuff. And then you see some comments that's like, Trump is ruining America, and this is the decline of the American empire is Trump's fault. And it's like, you guys are supposed to be leftists and socialists, and Kyle, of course, does have the caveat of, and this is all bad, and I don't endorse any of this. But you do get this very interesting, these socialist imperialists who want to see the United States. They are neoconservatives. They do want to see the United States exporting feminism, and they hate to see China coming in and being the new daddy of these smaller countries, because they know China is not going to export things like feminism and multiculturalism and secularism and atheism. So they're kind of sad about this. So you do have an element here of socialists who are neoconservatives in a sense, or maybe, and they're just reacting to Trump. Trump says war is bad, so I guess war is good now. And that sort of very simplistic red team versus blue team sports-like mentality. But it also brings me to an earlier point. I was talking about the Joker, and the interesting thing about these rich people is they're drunk. They're publicly drunk. And so there is this notion of aristocracy where rich people are not meant to be drunk. Rich people are meant to be self-controlled. I mean, imagine if you saw rich people on the subway, instead of being drunk and harassing people, they were uptight. They kept to themselves. They spoke quietly. They were sort of fearful and apprehensive. They keep their chin up. They have their good posture, and they keep their chin up, and they say, yes, Reginald, yes, that we have quite a number of good stocks today, yes. And so they have this attitude. That's sort of what we expect of rich people. That's what we want out of rich people. And so to see rich people acting out of line, to see them acting crazy, to see Thomas Wayne speaking bluntly, I think there is a sense in which the populace doesn't like that. The populace wants aristocrats. The populace wants rich people to act rich. Thomas Wayne to act like a rich man, not like a populist, not like a straight shooter, not like someone who tells it like it is. They want them to lie. They want them to be deceitful. They want them to be anti-formalist. They want them to be, whatever it is, juvenile. I don't know what the opposite of formalist is. I don't understand. I don't know what the semantics are. But anyway, they want this kind of hidden power. They don't want the man who is just out and about and flaunting his wealth. They want the man who's strategic about it. In some way, whether they realize it or not, that is the optimal strategy. So there is an issue there. There is an issue, and there is a kind of admiration that we can have for the way that the Chinese do things. They're very effective in the way that they wield power, and then we can look at that there is a kind of aristocrat who promotes chaos, and I guess I've spoken about this before, but who promotes chaos for the people, and then hoards order for himself. He wants to promote confusion for the people, but he wants to promote, a well-structured conservative mindset. I think what is the host, the founder of the adultery website. The website which is about adultery website. Am I going to get a Ashley Madison, right? So parent is Ruby Corp. I don't know if that's who founded it. I don't know that Ruby Corp founded it. Targets China's cheating hearts. Okay, Ruby Corp does not have a Wikipedia page. Is there a founder? Noel Biederman. It was the chief executive in 2015. It was founded by Darren Morgenstern. So let's take a look. Darren Morgenstern. Do we have? I'm just trying to find out if Darren Morgenstern has a wife. And what he thinks about if he is monogamous, or Noel Biederman, former lawyer and sports agent. We're just a platform. Personal life. Born Jewish, grandparents were Holocaust survivors. He is not particularly religious. He married Amanda Biederman. She's originally from South Africa with a background in marketing. He's happily married and himself does not cheat. However, through several email leaks, there were several extramarital affairs. So I guess he does cheat. But he claimed not to, at least. He claimed not to. So there is a bunch of there's levels to this, right? There is levels to this. Anyway, we're looking at some of these people, and an interesting question for a lot of these people would be something like, "Hey, you promote feminism, right? This is the classic." Who's that? Harvey Weinstein. He promotes feminism in the media. He promotes feminism for other people. He promotes feminism for the masses. Does he follow it himself? Is he a feminist in his own life? Probably not. Probably not. There you go. Probably not, right? So, with that being said, we've discussed a lot of these issues before. This is a rehash video. This is definitely a rehash. We've got some interesting things going on, and we're going to leave it there for next time. Until then, thanks for listening. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.